All right, welcome to the Investor's Guide of Memphis Real Estate. My name is Dean Harris, and as always, I'm with Douglas Skipworth. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Great. We bring you guys this podcast to give you the boots on the ground knowledge to be a successful real estate investor here in Memphis. Please like and subscribe to Investor's Guide of Memphis Real Estate on YouTube. Like our Facebook page. Listen on Spotify, wherever you catch your podcast. Please join us there. Show sponsors are listed on your screen below. Could not do this podcast without those show sponsors. Every single one of them play a vital role in my rental business, your rental business, and our clients. So please like and subscribe to those guys as well. Zoom calls, let's talk about those. I've had a few people that have emailed in and said they want to do those. I'm going to introduce those probably late January, going into February. So we'll be back with those. Lastly, I help buyers and sellers every day. So if you've got any questions on selling a property, buying anything here in Memphis, Dean at CrestCore.com, and I'll be happy to help you there.
Sweet.
Great. Good news. Happy New Year to you, to everybody else. We're excited to be in here today and talking about, well, how was the holiday? How did you buy anything? Did you sell anything? Was there activity over the last 2 weeks? Not much, is there?
A little bit. I mean, you helped us close a deal right there at the end of the year.
Yeah.
That was sweet.
Yep.
So
a lot of activity towards the end of the year. A lot of people don't understand that in our world, like 90% of the people quit working in our industry December 15th on. And we were able to find some good deals. You found that one.
Yes.
So there are deals that are out there, guys. The first of this year has started off how it always does, a little slow last week. However, this week things are picking up. So we're excited about that. Today, we're going to dive right into the top 5 things to ask your property manager, right? We get a lot of questions all the time on, do they do this? Will they do that? How does this work? So I thought it'd be a good topic today just to kind of go into some of the things that we typically hear with property management questions. This is your forte. This is kind of your baby a little bit. So I'm going to lean on you for this. But some of first question in my mind that I kind of think of is like, what area do you cover?
Right. Yeah.
What, is it a certain pocket? Is it, cause I don't think we have a lot here. Most of our property managers here will cover everything, but there are management companies that might say, hey, we only are going to cover a certain area of town.
I think you're right. No, I think there are certain companies that aren't licensed in Mississippi.
Yeah.
So they can't cover North Mississippi, or vice versa. If they're just working North Mississippi, so they're not coming into Tennessee. Yep. Some people that don't go into some of the other counties outside of Shelby County, Memphis. Yeah. So I mean, it plays. That's a great question. And then, I mean, I think we get into it later about the price point of the rentals, but that affects the parts of town, as far as areas and what you're buying and what you're renting in. So
always an important question here because of where we're located geographically. We're bordered with states, and you've got to be licensed to do property management. So that's a relevant question here.
Yes.
If you're buying in DeSoto County and your property manager, and they're not going to be able to help you. So a good question in our market is,
or we'll get into it later about an agent. Can they help you buy there or whatever?
That's right.
So those are good. Yeah. So to me, it's like, what areas do you cover? How many properties do you manage in that area?
Yeah.
How long have you managed those properties in that area? What's your experience? What's your assessment of that area where the person's about,
like their opinion.
What's your opinion? What's your opinion of that area? Tell me, and not so much your opinion is your experience and your facts. So give me some facts, like kind of like we do with the zip code breakdown. Like, tell me, what are the rents over there? What are the bedrooms, bathrooms? What are the makeup of the houses? What's the rent rate like? What's the collection like? What's the economic activity? And we've talked about stuff about different parts of town that have different economic engines and things that bring them. So understanding that from your property manager, I love it. I like to know how often they're in that area.
You mean physically?
Yeah. Like, are you out there? Are you driving there, or your field techs, or your property managers, or your leasing agents, or your technicians? Like, are you out in that area? Do you really know what's going on? Or is it like, oh yeah, we manage over there?
Yeah. I love that. Do you get into that area? Ask about leasing team and the process they go through to rent out a property. I don't know how much different that is, but I'll let you speak on it. Is that generally the same process with each management company, or do those differ?
So, Dean, is it the same process when a buyer asks you to buy a house?
No.
Yeah. So it's like, so I started kind of with you about when you're asking about the leasing team, it's like, what first we start is like, what are the rent range recommendations for that area? And then what is the scope of work you need to do on that property to get kind of a low end range to a high end range on the things you're doing. And then it's like, how do you market the property? How do you do showings? What is your application process like? How do they make a security deposit? How do they go about signing leases? Do they come in? Do you go through it? Is it DocuSign? What do you do? How is the move-in process? Do they just pick up a key and go, or do you meet them out there and do it? And then how do renewals work? So to me, there are a lot of variables in there, and everybody does it a little bit differently. So it's a similar process, but the way everybody does those processes differently, you could have really different looking leasing processes at different property managers.
So to me, that's an extremely important question to ask. Sounds to me like, since there's so many different variations of it, and I'm admittedly unaware of any other way other than the way we do it here. Right. My general question is just, hey, how do we, is that a universal process? It sounds like absolutely not.
No, they're probably kind of, again, agents all do the same thing. They just list your house and sell it for you. Or they just help you make an offer for you. It's like, broad brush. Yes, we all do the same thing. But man, once you talk about it, it's really a difference.
How important is it? Our next thing was, how important is this for the price range? Meaning, do you think it's the same thing or the same process with different rent ranges? In other words, hey, where is you guys' main rental focus? Are you an 800 rental management company, or are you an 1800?
I think that's fair. It's a great question to ask and to talk to the different property managers about, of where they fall in. It gets a little bit into that first question of what part of town, what area are you covering? Because there are certain people who delineate based on the rent ranges to do that. So you got to ask that, and then you got to understand. And kind of, we talked about that a little bit, I guess, in that second one about the leasing process of like, hey, what recommendations do you have for this area? A big point of distinction for rents in our area, as you know, are appliances.
Just had the conversation yesterday.
With a prospective buyer about, do you provide appliances at that rent range?
With our property management team, like, hey, should I or shouldn't I?
Yeah, it's where's that cutoff of like, hey, they can bring their own. Hey, it's expected to provide these. Small multifamily, it's different. So that's great. One thing I thought about as we were talking about this was on leasing is also understanding the leasing charges. Like, when they place a tenant, when they have a property for rent, does the company charge a marketing fee? Do they charge a leasing fee? Do they charge a renewal fee, a placement fee?
That has to be one of the more important things, because I'm guessing if you don't go through in fine detail and understand that, you're going to have a whole lot of questions come up.
Surprises.
Why is this? What's going? So I think it's important to figure out. That's to me might be the most important part of learning a management company, is learning where you're charged.
What's your value? What value they're providing, and how you're paying for that value.
I agree. Think that's huge. Okay, this might be the biggest maintenance calls. This to me is the most important thing on how a management company handles it as an owner. When I work here with the property management team, I know how it works, and it's fairly seamless, and I enjoy how that process is. But others, assuming you manage somewhere else other than here, shame on you for that. But if you do, seeing how other companies handle maintenance, I know your history with understanding different companies. I guess maybe the best question is, how does it work here, if you want to explain that, or maybe some of the differences in other companies?
I'm good. I'm good either way. So, but I'll start with like the questions that I think to ask on that. Again, kind of like we did with leasing, like what you're expecting the leasing team to provide information on, suggestions and recommendations. And I think the maintenance goes the same way. So for me, it's like that. What's that maintenance process? So what are you doing on the front end to do preventative maintenance, but then once those calls start coming in, is it a live person that answers the phone, or is it an automated menu? Is there an online portal to submit requests? How do you take emergency calls? How do you handle emergencies?
A lot of moving parts.
Tons of moving parts. Are these maintenance requests, or are these work orders that get done? Is there an approved amount that the owner says, hey, if it's X dollars, go ahead and do it?
That's what I do.
Or if you got to ask the owner's approval on everything. So do they use in-house technicians, or do they use vendors to go out and service customers, to service the tenants and the clients there? So, and what's the markup, right? Everybody's in this to get paid for their time and the service and the value they add. Yeah. Everybody's charging a markup. How does that come across to the client? So tons of questions to help. And then I guess we kind of alluded to it, but it's like, what's the preventative maintenance? How often are you on the premises, looking at it, changing filters, doing a 10, 20, 50 point inspection, whatever process you use, whatever the process the property management company uses? Just need to understand it and ask questions. There's not necessarily right or wrongs. No. There's just differences of like, what do you want to pay for?
So that is one of the things that I have caught other owners coming back in and saying that they didn't understand, not necessarily here, I'm just talking like in general, that they didn't necessarily understand when and how often the property manager visited the property for whatever reason. When you just said preventative maintenance, like, we do a great job here of in the spring, checking all the AC units and smoke detectors, and there's a great process to do that here. Well, not every management company does that. And having that tool with your management company is huge, especially if you're an out-of-state investor. And most of you guys that are here in Memphis are out-of-state investors. So to have that eye on the property another time, of course, there's a small charge for it, but to get out there and check all that and replace air filters and smoke detectors and the things that you've got to have with your management company, like you might go through a tenant or two, unfortunately, and the tenant's not going to care about any of that. So none of that is going to be maintained as far as your AC units or furnace or batteries in a smoke detector. If you don't check those things, you're going to be sitting there, and then it compiles and things become expensive. So I love that part of our company, and I love. I'm assuming or hoping, if you're not managing here, that company and that person is touching that. I think the biggest takeaway today is how many times. If we just had to take one question out of this for me, it's how many times does your management company touch your house? Now there's 8 questions underneath that. Yeah. But to me, that's a great question to ask and talk about, is how many times during a season, without being prompted, does the property management company touch the house with their eyes?
That's a great point. I mean, and what's that going to look like? Because when it comes to leasing it, and then she's talking about the property maintenance team, the preventative maintenance team. You're talking about the renewal team. You're talking about the collections team. You're talking about the field tech team. So there's a lot that's a really good question.
For various reasons, I think they all should have their eyes on it, right?
Yeah.
For their own specific reasons, it seems like several people should see it.
That's good.
How about rehabs? How about ask the company if they handle a turn? Because that's one thing that I think you could be, kind of caught with your pants down if you hire a management company and they manage it, but all of a sudden someone moves out and you've got a $5,500 turn with carpet and paint or whatever it might be, but they don't do that. They only do clogged toilets and replacing light bulbs and whatever. Yeah. They don't handle that. Now you're with a management company that all of a sudden you have to go look for a general contractor. And they're likely not going to recommend one, because then they're on the hook for the recommendation. So asking the company if they can, how far can they go? I don't think we expect them to be a full-blown construction company. No. But to handle some turns and things like that, I think it's important to ask.
Again, it gets back to similar questions you're asking on the leasing agent and the maintenance team of like, hey, now that somebody's moved out and it's time to rehab this property again, what do I need to do to get this different rent ranges? Yes. So it's like, do I carpet and paint just to get the minimum, or do I hey, now's a chance to redo that bathroom or redo that kitchen or do some upgrades to get the market rent? Do I put appliances? I wasn't using appliances, but now I want to put in stainless appliances and push the top of the market for the rent. And these are good things that the property manager with the leasing agent, with the maintenance team or the rehab team, depending on whether they're using in-house or a vendor contractor, they should have somebody as a point person. It might be the property manager, or it might be somebody who works, an assistant property manager. So great questions to ask. I mean, tons of questions. There are tons of questions to ask, but it gets it to your point. It's like, what are the overarching kind of where you can group those questions together to know, like, what is it that you need to go in there with these 5 questions, which I think you did.
Yeah. I think it's each one of these, you could probably ask 3 or 4 sub-questions on each one
yes,
of them.
yes.
And, we could spend all day talking about the different conversations that we have. But to me, the takeaway is, figuring out how active they are in the community and the one that you're buying in. Do they visit and touch the properties? And how much are you going to pay for their services? I mean, I just think in having that understanding going into it, knowing backwards and forwards, don't just take somebody else. Hey, we manage there. It's great. That'll work to get yourself in the door and to understand, but you really need to go in and dive and start asking these questions yourself, because you'll be setting yourself up for disappointment. I mean, I can't tell you how many times over the years, I don't mean recently, but over the years, I've talked to investors and I didn't know that. Well, whose fault is that? You know what I mean? Like that goes back to you guys as the owner, is to managing the manager.
Yeah.
That's a popular term.
Yes.
To manage the manager. And I think if you do that, that's, we've talked about there is no such thing. I love there's no such thing as passive income. Yeah. It doesn't exist. There's less, passive or less involved, less active. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be, your fist in the ground on this, but keeping that light touch with your property manager, understanding the ins and outs of their business are going to keep you clear from, this isn't going right, or did you just not know? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think owners, if they'll look themselves in the mirror or look at me right now on this podcast, and you ask yourself, how much of the responsibility of, man, I didn't know that. Like, why didn't you, that's on you. That's on the investor. And I think property managers, not just us, but anyone, can get a bad rap or have a bad circumstance with an investor. And I've been in here before where there's been different disagreements. And the actuality of it, it turns out that owner typically holds the majority of the problem because they didn't do any homework and they didn't know. So I'm encouraging, if you've got ownership now or you own properties now and you're being managed either by us or by whoever else it might be, I would ask some questions. If you didn't know these things today, I would encourage you to reach out to whoever your representatives that you want to find out. Yeah. I mean, just look into these things and see. Anything else to add? I mean,
I think before I summarize those, I think the 2 things that we hadn't talked a lot about, which is what's the communication process like? Mm-hmm. Do you email? Do you phone call? Do you have meetings monthly? How do you communicate? Yeah. How do you communicate with an owner? How do you communicate with the tenants? Mm-hmm. Just to understand that process. And then number 2 is, based on all of these services, this menu and all this, what's pick and choose, what's standard, and what is the price associated with that? If I'm going to be paying for these services, what am I getting? What does that look like? Yeah. So I think that's everybody's going to ask that question.
The same thing.
So everybody's going to always ask how much this costs. So
that's right.
So you don't have to tell people to ask that question.
For sure.
So to me, what I heard was like, hey, ask them what coverage area they're in.
Yep.
Ask them about the leasing process and then the kind of the price range they work in. Yep. Ask them about the maintenance process and ask them about the rehab process.
That's right.
So talk about these big 5 processes.
And then the few sub questions underneath them, and I think you'll at least be good to go to get yourself started.
Yes.
Anything else?
No, man.
Property management is one of the biggest keys to your success. I am here to say that. I've been buying long enough now to know that at the very beginning, I'm not sure. A lot of people say they'll self-manage with it. I'm just here to tell you, if you're a real estate investor and buy and hold property, you do not want to manage yourself. And you want to make sure that you go in and talk to management companies and ask these 5 or 6 questions to make sure you fully understand what's going on. It's a must. I'm not telling you that this is something that you can do and you should do. These 5 questions and this process of understanding your property manager, to me, is a must if you want to have success long term.
It's a must because if your property management company is not doing them, you're self-managing them, you got to cover them yourself. You got to know these things.
And you aren't going to know any of this being 3,000 miles away.
Yeah, you're right.
Thanks for your time today, guys. Appreciate you. If you have any questions, Dean at CrestCore.com, and we will see you next week.